Hello and welcome to Aftermath, Mirror Fighting's Sunday look back on Saturday night's fights. Please do, if you're watching on YouTube, please do subscribe to the channel. Give us a thumbs up. Every little helps. Be nice. Be kind during these difficult times. I'm Martin Doman, editor of Mirror Fighting. I'm going to focus, as we did yesterday, on Oleksandr Usyk's second examination in the heavyweight division as he took on Derek Chisora in London. Now, the man himself, the former undisputed cruiserweight champion, rated his performance as a 3 out of 10. Seems harsh. I suggest he'll be slightly better than that. Two of the judges scored it 115, 113, very narrow. And actually, you know, as much as there has been some controversy about this, the scoring and the result, only one round away from being a majority draw. The other 117, 1112, much more in keeping with my own score of 117, 111. So, to the fight, Chisora did start well. The first couple of rounds were definitely his. He came out very aggressive, came out swinging, sometimes too much so. But it's hardly a surprise that the fight developed in the way it did. We talked all week about Usyk and whether he could deal with the bigger men at heavyweight. And although he was confident, and although he eventually did, he's hardly going to come out in his second heavyweight fight after a year out of the ring against someone as big as Derek Chisora and trade or go swinging himself. He was always, I think, going to take a look early on and then try to figure out Derek Chisora, much as we laboured about Vasily Lomachenko, who didn't quite manage to do it against Teofimo Lopez a couple of weeks ago. But there's a similar sort of narrative in play there. So, yes, but don't take anything away from Chisora. He did came out very well. As I said, won those first couple of rounds, did catch Usyk, who definitely looked uncomfortable. But it's a 12-round fight. There's no need to be concerned after 2 rounds. And I imagine he took a lot away from those 2 rounds. And then really from the third round on, it was his fight. So having given Chisora those first 2 rounds, I then gave him 1 of the next 10, which just, for me anyway, shows how dominant Usyk was. Chisora sort of did have a little rally early in the second half of the fight, but there was also a point where he walked back to his corner and he looked tired. He looked, as we sort of talked about before, bewildered, almost just a little bit like, how do I deal with this guy? What more can I do to stop him from imposing himself on the fight? But as we said, he had trained hard. That was in evidence. There's no way he would have got through that fight if he wasn't in tip-top shape. Ultimately, class told. It's just Usyk, his footwork, you have to really admire it. It's very rare to see a fighter of any weight, any division, at the elite level who swings and misses, as Chisora did at some points. Now, I'm sure of some of those shots there was a little bit of desperation or frustration, but most of them were because Usyk just read the shot and was out of the way, skipped away, and therefore you left Chisora lunging. He had his back to Usyk sometimes as well. To do that at that heavyweight division really is remarkable, and it almost makes those shots from Chisora look amateurish, but it's really not anything to do with that. It's just the way that Usyk's able to defend, and his footwork, gets him out of trouble. And maybe for those first couple of rounds, he wasn't quite able to get that in sync, but eventually he got going. And as I said, there has been some discussion around the scoring. If you're going to interview one of Chisora's best friends, as Sky did in Tony Bellew after the fight, you're probably going to get a biased opinion, but to talk about how he was robbed or how he should have won, as I said, I think giving Usyk the fight by 2 rounds was generous to Chisora, never mind giving it a draw or anything else. I think in the cold light of day, I think most people, maybe even Chisora himself, will accept that Usyk was the better fighter by some way, and he deserved to win. There's no need for a rematch. There's no need really for much debate. I think the fight panned out, by and large, as a lot of people expected. Chisora, yes, had his moments. Usyk, however, showed his class and came through. No, it wasn't a 12-round lopsided complete demolition job. No, he didn't get him out of there late on, as I thought he might do, but he was definitely the better fighter throughout. And of course, now the question is, can he be the better fighter against Anthony Joshua, against Tyson Fury, against the world champions, of course, the elite of the division? Usyk thinks so, of course, but there are definitely still questions. And ultimately, I'm not sure whether we will ever see, we'll never see those fights. I don't think to actually find out for sure. Usyk is not going to fight Anthony Joshua next. I'm convinced of it. If the WBO force Joshua to give up the WBO their title, then he will do. I imagine that would leave Usyk facing likely Daniel Dubois as long as he comes through against Joe Joyce. But again, will that fight be made in this time without crowds? I'm not sure either. I'm sure Dubois will want a lot of money for that one. So difficult to see where Usyk goes from next. Maybe it wouldn't be the worst thing for him to have another, build-up fight just to get himself in there at heavyweight, in which case he may well let Joshua and Fury fight for the undisputed title. But there are still questions, of course there are, as there should be with a cruiserweight moving up to heavyweight. Whether those questions will be answered or not, we will have to wait and see. Also on Matchroom's card, Lee Selby dropped a decision to George Kambosos. Definitely the right result. It was a split decision in the end, but questionable whether it should have been. But just a note on the scoring, I think after the Terry O'Connor situation the other week, which was a farce, I think Miguel Vasquez did win that fight, and O'Connor's scoring was all over the shop. It feels like any judge or pundit who disagrees with the majority decision is now crazy. Who can't possibly ever score or judge a fight again. They have to be completely wrong. And there were people, I think, on DAZN who gave Selby that decision. I disagreed. Most people disagreed. But we can't just pile on anybody who says that they disagree with the official decision, especially if you're people like Andy Lee, I think, who scored it for Selby. Is he suddenly a bad judge of a fight? I don't think so. But anyway, Kambosos delivered on foreign soil. Good to see that can still happen. Selby really now difficult to see where he goes from here. Hasn't looked great, I would argue, in his last couple of fights, really since he was beaten by Josh Warrington. I think that fight took so much out of him down at featherweight, and he just is not the same force at lightweight. So difficult to see where he goes if he carries on from here. For Kambosos, of course, he called out the new champion, Teofimo Lopez, now mandatory for him. Wants to fight in Australia next year, which in terms of having a crowd, makes sense, could be a big fight. But if I'm Lopez, I'm not going anywhere. I don't need George Kambosos right now. That would leave Kambosos to fight for the vacant title, likely against Gustavo Lemos, Argentinian, undefeated. Obviously a much smaller fight, but nevertheless, a chance for the Australian to win a world title. Someone who does have a world title is Savannah Marshall, arguably the best performance of the evening, as she really took apart Scotland's Hannah Rankin before securing a 7th round stoppage. A masterclass. Very hard to find fault with Marshall's performance. Punch perfect, you could argue. Very, very classy display. And during a time in lockdown where women's fighting has come to the fore and will do so again in a couple of weeks when Katie Taylor is back in action, headlining an all-female card, I think, or at least a majority female card. Savannah Marshall has put herself into that mix to be talked about as one of the best in the world. And of course, in theory, our hope is that the natural fight to make is against Clarissa Shields. Marshall being the only one to beat Shields ever at any amateur or professional when they fought as amateurs. That fight, they both apparently want it, if you believe social media. So hopefully that fight can be made next year. Just touching on the two main events in America overnight. We had Gervonta Davis, really classy display against Leo Santa Cruz. 6th round uppercut stoppage, brilliant knockout, worth checking out. Definitely up there for knockout of the year. Whether it was better than Povetkin against White, unsure. And then also now Inoue retained his world title with a 7th round stoppage of Jason Maloney. Another classy display from the Japanese fighter. And we really, these are not new names necessarily in Davis or Inoue. or indeed Usyk, but really going into 2021 when you are thinking, okay, well, who is next? You know, who is the next? I mean, Usyk's a bit older, but the other two, and then Lopez from earlier this last month, they're the next generation really looking pretty strong at the moment. That's all from me for today. I will be back tomorrow with George Groves and Declan Taylor for a more comprehensive look back at the weekend's fights and a projection to see what's next, especially in that heavyweight division. And then we'll be back next weekend with the usual program of shows. Thank you for watching. As I said, we are on YouTube, we are on Facebook. Please do continue to support.